Hi, and welcome to Rule of Carnage. This is a channel, podcast, a YouTube video series where myself, Glenn Ford, a games designer and developer, chats to this guy, Mike Hutchinson, also a games designer and developer, about designing better miniatures games. Today, we're going to talk about granularity. So granularity is something that we've mentioned in passing in other videos, and it's something we've mentioned with very little reference as to what we meant by the word. It's something that comes up a lot, particularly early on in your sort of design process, where you're trying to figure out what your game is about.
And also, the word sounds like sand or grit, so it sometimes gets confused for both friction and crunchiness, but it's not, and we'll figure out the difference.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I want to say is importantly, I don't think that granularity and crunchiness are related to each other, but they connect through complexity, which can sometimes make one or the other, but doesn't necessarily. So, what we mean by granularity, what I mean by granularity is sort of the focus level of the game, the degree to which your game is trying to zoom into a particular world, the sorts of things it wants to talk about. Often it's about how simulationist your game is maybe trying to be, if these games really sort of can be simulationist. So it's a bit like, to take in reference to something like wounds and injury sort of mapping that we were talking about a few conversations ago. If a game has a high degree of granularity, then someone's going to get shot in the foot, and that's going to cause them to limp, and so they'll like lose speed until they take more wounds and maybe stop, and eventually more wounds kill them. Whereas on a more, and the opposite, I think, of that end of things is abstraction. And in a more abstracted game, someone takes a wound and they die, and there's like, I don't really care whether the guy got shot in the head or shot in the chest, or frankly, I don't care if he took an arrow to the knee and fell to the floor, and now he just can't fight. If he can't fight as effectively as everybody else, once he's dropped a little bit behind, he drops behind, he's left behind, we're done. We don't care that much.
Interesting. So I'm just gonna say that I have a slightly orthogonal understanding of granularity, or the way that I use it is slightly different. It's sort of interrelated. It might be two axes of the same thing, which is when I'm talking about granularity, or when I'm using granularity to analyze my designs, it's often like literally about how many graduations something is divided into. So a D6 being less graduated than a D20, or models having one wound being a blunter instrument, the models having 10 wounds. And so it's very much related that, like, I might have a very broad specificity, or sort of general view of the battlefield, and so this tank has one wound and that unit has one wound. But I think that, like, the specificness of whether or not you're doing an injury to a leg or a foot or whatever, and the degree to which you are so the degree to which you're abstracting and the degree to which you are slicing up your games design components, I think they tend to travel in the same direction, but they don't necessarily have to. So, for example, in Hobgoblin, which is it's not very granular about the kinds of stress, danger, wounds, and general malaise that your soldiers can suffer. They just get this thing called doom, and it can account for many sorts of erosion of their spirit or body. So that's not a very granular mechanic, that doom mechanic. But at the same time, it's like it's cut into lots of different slices. You get sort of 10 or 12 of those things. So it's not like you take 2 and you die. It's like it could have been 100, but it's 12.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's granularity of rules, and there's sort of granularity of story. And there's like I said, I think there's a place where they all sort of connect through complexity. I mean, the example I think of, like, in relation to granularity of story, you can have like particularly RPGs. You can have
Hmm.
RPGs that are very granular in the nature of their story and the focus and what they're talking about, with rules that are they're incredibly smooth, virtually non-existent.
Right. Yeah.
A lot of independent RPGs, we'll talk about like a day in the life of a particular character and the quite mundane minutiae of what they're going through, which is a very granular thing to be focusing on. And then their rules are basically like, it doesn't really matter. We're not really bothered about the actual affordances of the things we're using,
Right.
etc. And the thing is that granularity of rules, I think, is sometimes connected quite closely to complexity. And the smoothness of your rules and the granularity of the rules then start relating to the time that your game takes. And these are going to be things I think we're going to be talking to in a few of the sort of the conversations that are coming up in relation to this subject. But
so Glenn, when you're pitching into a new games designer, you've got that bug in your ear and you want to get something down on paper, does this question of granularity, does this come up consciously for you quite early, or is it something that you only worry about later on?
I think for me personally, when I'm starting on new design, it's about the idea. And what is the idea tells me what things I need to or want to get granular about. Let's put it that way. Because one of the things about granularity is you don't require the same level of focus across all parts of your game. You might feel like, okay, well, I've gone very sort of detailed onto this thing. It's going to be kind of weird if I abstract that thing over there. That really isn't a problem. That is not an issue. It's more about having a certain amount of confidence, knowing what you want your design to be about, and then presenting the snare of the tree is a series of essays on game design that I just read recently, and there's a lovely line in that where the guy says, Alex Kennedy says, decide what your game is about and then present that with a LAN, which and panache. And that's the thing of decide what your game is about, and then you don't need to make excuses, and you don't need to worry so long as you do that thing properly. And so what I tend to do is, okay, well, what is this game really about? That thing needs to have the correct level of granularity to make that thing happen right, and kind of screw everything else.
Right. And I think like implicit in that is that each thing that you have to engage with is going to take some of your time at the table. And so you want to direct as much time towards the thing, the central exciting things that are in that game, and not force people to do busy work in things that aren't really related, because you feel like they should be or normally are part of a game like that. And so I think something will feel like busy work if it takes up some time and it doesn't feel like it's pointed at the core loop of either the fantasy or the sort of mechanical joy of the system.
And I think this is one of these things where, again, this is about how much like salt your particular meal happens to need. Because in relation to that idea of someone gets shot in the leg and is now limping around, there are games where that's going to happen and someone's going to go, oh my god, this is so cool, you can get shot in the leg and then be limping around, that's so detailed. And then there are going to be games where people are going to go, oh really, now my guy's limping, I don't care, I don't want a guy who's limping. And this is what I'm talking about, where a lot of it is about
that's where the elan comes in. It's like if you have unsuccessfully pitched what's exciting about the game, then I guess you also run the risk of like, you've got granularity which people haven't bought into yet, so they're not excited about that granularity, versus like, this is a game about tank warfare, where like the maintenance level of your tanks and which bits of like equipment you've got lying around to solve each problem as each tank breaks down in an individual way, like that could be amazing, or completely irritating and tedious, depending on how you've been sold it.
Yeah, exactly, and I think that's quite a good example in our history. As people who've been watching the channel might remember, there was an early version of Gaslands where certain bits of damage caused your car to not steer in a particular way, and so you could only go left, or you could only go to a certain gear, or you would take hull every time a certain thing happened. And there are definitely games. There's like an F1 simulation game where the fact that your left tire is degrading means that when you turn left you're more likely to spin out. With that's brilliant and it's perfect, but by God, that would have been absolutely terminal in Gaslands. It would have just been fatal for people to be like, what do you mean I can't go left anymore? This is not what this game is about. This is not the focus. And as I say, I think that Granularity is a lot about the focus of your design, what story you want to be telling, and once you've decided what that story is, what experiences you're trying to share, then you can go quite focused, you can go quite detailed, and you go quite granular on that bit of the game.
I think this is also like, there's also a real element of what kind of gamer or games designer one is. So I can't really imagine making an extremely granular, detailed game in any genre, because I tend to be fairly forgetful and slightly impressionistic about my use of rule sets. And so what I'm looking for is something that delivers like a big flavor without too much remembering of rules and futzing around on the table, which absolutely isn't everyone else's. That's not the totality of game experience. Other people love the puzzles of constructing very, very complicated subsystems together into a thing that can magically do something that nobody else spotted. I'm just much less likely to head down the direction of writing one of those, because for me as a player, the granularity I'm looking for is a bit more like throw the dice, hoot at the top of my voice. So I think like as a designer, like it's also a question of being self-aware enough to understand when you are accidentally going too granular because you feel like this is what you're supposed to do, and then being able to step back and go, no, I don't want the ammo management system. No ammo management and jamming. Get out of my game. I don't care for you.
Yeah, no, I mean, so the game that that I was talking about a few weeks ago, and that I'm interested in and working on at the moment, Pitch and Yaw, which I'm currently renaming.
It's going to be called Yoho.
I'm going for Buccaneers and Black Flags at the moment because I think it's got a pulp thing to it, and I think that might work well. But anyway, it doesn't have line of sight. It has shooting, but it doesn't have line of sight. It just does not care. Something's within a certain range. I don't care if there are people in the way. And obviously, you're writing a skirmish game, and you get to the shooting bit, and obviously there's a line of sight rule.
You just put it in. It's yeah. You can't even help yourself now. You're just like you've gone to sleep during that part. Just like what?
And it's and there's a moment of playing it a few times and playing it a few times, just going getting to the bit where someone has to do line of sight, and it's just like this isn't what this game doesn't care about line of sight. It's not even a very granular rule, it's not a game with a lot of terrain. It's a fairly sort of flat surface because that's not what it's about. The line of sight itself was very simple, and as soon as I saw somebody moving minis to block a line of sight to something, I was like, no, that's not. You shouldn't.
Not my game.
That's not this game. Stop it. And it's just like, no. Cross out the line of sight rules. Doesn't care. Doesn't matter. Game doesn't need. It doesn't need line of sight. If it doesn't need it, you can just cut it out. Equally, way down the other end of the scale,
you're also not allowed to re-roll any dice.
Way down the other end of the scale, I mentioned a little on a few conversations ago that once or twice when Mike has presented an idea to me, I've run off and written my version of the thing to avoid assaulting him with it. And when Mike first presented Hobgoblin to me, I had this moment of, well, what would I want a mass fantasy battle game to be? And what I want from a mass fantasy battle game is you read stories of actual battles where somebody sets up in a certain position and the other guy goes off and he gets one unit of his dudes and he teaches them to like literally climb cliffs, and then they climb up a cliff and they like ambush around and they surprise the artillery and they annihilate the other guy. It's like, I want to set up a game where somebody puts down artillery in an entrenched position, and I go, right, okay, I'm going to scrub all this stuff off my army list, and I'm going to pay these points into these guys being able to do that, and I'm going to actually literally surprise you at the table by doing that. And so
that might actually make a way better card game where you don't have to play out the miniature war game at the end, because
I mean,
it feels like a lot of that's the exchange of wits and treachery at the beginning of the planning and the advance.
Conceivably, but for my own amusement, I wrote that game, and that is an immensely granular game. That's like, that game is super.
Well, it depends what like material their boots are made out of, whether they can be heard on the slate, and if the slate is wet.
Well, it's this thing where you can go into like buying dips and undulations on the battlefield, so that you can
undulation 15 points.
Absolutely genuinely, x many points, x amount of undulation, and it had re-rolls, but you could spend a certain number of re-rolls to just place a dice, because after 3 re-rolls you should just be able to place it. But that's a point where that game was like, well, what I really want to get really granular about what is happening in this battle, where it's being fought, how it's being fought, what matters about it. So that game went into that, and that was fine. I don't know if I'll ever do anything with it, and I would like it, but I don't know that other people would. But it's about making that choice. It's about knowing, okay, where's the focus? Where do we want to put time in? What things can we just bin out because they're not what this design is about and this game is about? And figuring out the story you want to tell, the detail you want to go into on it, and to a degree, the complexity of it. And I think in the next conversation, we'll talk a little bit more about complexity and why granularity isn't crunchiness, and what crunchiness is, and why a game can be granular and smooth, or crunchy and zoomed out. But for now, I think that was a nice little conversation about granularity. We will sign off for now. If you've watched through to this point, please do like and subscribe. Also, if you are a games designer and you like chatting to people about games design, we have a Discord channel.
We have a Discord?
We have a Discord channel in which people go and they do talk, and I am one of the people who goes in there. And now that Mike is aware of it, Mike might be one of the people who goes in there. The link is in the description below this video. It's a public link, so you can just follow it and go in and ask people who are trying to design these sorts of games about your sort of game and what issues you're having, or pitch in on other people's problems and issues. There are conversations going on in that channel right now about actual games design issues, people who want your opinions on these things. So jump in, pitch in, give your opinion on various subjects and topics. Look us up on social media. We are out and about. There are, again, links at the bottom of this video. I think for now, from this episode of Rule of Carnage, we thank you and goodbye. So bye-bye. Thank you.